Hey people, Shaman Hawk here for Shamanic Lodge. People have asked me what got you into the environment so much? I mean, how come you're so passionate about environmentalism? What happened to you? Okay. Well, actually, back probably the first thing was when I was about 6 years old. I was living in Falls Church, Virginia, not too far from Washington D.C. And we would go to the Potomac River now and then. And back then, that would be in 1964. So pollution was just rampant. Anything and everything just ran from companies into creeks because it would just go into the sea, and there's plenty of water in the sea to dilute it. However many hundreds or whatever miles away. But meanwhile, you'd go by the river, and your parents would let you kind of walk around, but don't get in the water. Don't touch the water. Don't. That was serious back then. Don't get that shit in your mouth. You know, and people would get severely ill if they went swimming, get splashed in their eyes or mouth or whatever like that. And but that's the way it was back then. Well, that's progress. One day I went down by a creek and it was fluorescent green because a garage has just been dumping antifreeze. And they're like, well, there's no real laws against it, blah blah, and we'll talk to them. But meanwhile, so anyways, I used to hear the older people saying, yeah, it used to be the herring would come up the river and we could fish and get all kinds of herring. And that stopped. I'm like, oh, I don't remember that. I'm too young. One of my buddies got severely ill from swimming in a creek that was a tributary to the Potomac, and was in the hospital for a while. And just like, wow, if you get into the water, so water was bad. That's how we were growing up. And at the same time, you'd see going down the road, you see factories with smoke and just polluting. But then again, so is everybody's house because you could smoke in any building. Just the world in general is just polluted. You know, Airplanes had this stratus cloud of tobacco smoke about that high next to your seat because after you took off, people could smoke whenever, and the plane was just full of it. So we were in a really polluted world, really polluted country back in the 60s. And so we went to Australia in 1968, and my brother almost died because of he got the Hong Kong flu shot. And that almost killed him. And then a year later, he got glandular fever because he ate an apple off of a cart and didn't wash the insecticide off of it. And he just bit into the apple, kid. He was probably 8 years old then. And so yeah, it almost killed him then. And so, and they say, oh yeah, you got to wash all the vegetables super, super good. It's like, really? All right. And the same thing back in the waterways, and you couldn't go swimming in any of the creeks, any of the rivers or anything like that. And like, this is just so frustrating. As a kid, I even knew that something was just seriously wrong about all this. In 1975, I'm in the Marine Corps, and all the vehicles had these stickers on them, exempt from EPA regulations. And fuel went on the ground, all kinds of hazardous chemicals just went dumped anywhere and everywhere. It's like, it's warfare. We're practicing for warfare, Cold War. The Russians, the Chinese, communism, blah, blah. Pollution's okay. And it was just horrific. So for a few years of that, got back out into the construction industry. And when I was 20, 21, and the same thing with the construction, and back into Arlington, Virginia. And we were spraying the forms, concrete forms that we were using for bridges and things like that with diesel fuel. So the concrete wouldn't stick to the form. You could peel it off. And of course, it would rain on the forms, and there's just oil slicks everywhere that drained into the creeks, that went into the river, into the bay, and so on. Years later, I'm a oyster diver in the Chesapeake Bay, mostly around Severn River. And so that's probably about 3 years after that, after the construction part. And algae everywhere. It's harder and harder to find. You were allowed 50 bushels of oysters. Oysters are really environmental sensitive. And so it was just going down year by year. We were doing good. You could get your fill in a couple hours. You couldn't go into the water until the sun came up completely. And you just go get oysters, and it had to be a certain size and so on. And it was good money, you know. And oyster season was any month that had an R in it, and we were divers. Yeah. So, what else? And back into construction. So I bounced around a lot of jobs just because of looking for work. And eventually ended up sailing to Florida in the year the shuttle blew up. I forget that year. So I was thinking it'd be nice to go back into Florida. Go back and I got to Fort Lauderdale. The reefs were just fluorescent colored. It was beautiful, you know. And within a few years, about 4 or 5 years, the first reef. There was 3 reefs going out, and it was kind of dingy colors. You know, this was like a quick swim. It's probably 200 yards offshore. And then it wasn't within that, I want to say, 10-year period. That first reef was just all covered in algae. And I was flying with a friend that was learning to fly, and we were going down the beach, and the water was this dingy green, and then right after Port Everglades, the water was crystal clear blue. So as we were coming back up the beach, we went down to the Keys, coming back up, the water was just crystal blue all through Hollywood, which is south of Fort Lauderdale, and then you see this big green line of just sludgy stuff come out, and the current would take it north. And that was right then. I'm like, I'm not swimming any farther north than Hollywood Beach. And I didn't ever after that. And then, unless there's an offshore wind, then the water clears up. So looking at this, and then within the next 10 years, you know, the second reef, and finally, and this, you know, 30 some years later, all the reefs are dead, nothing but algae on every rock. And the biggest polluter, you know, is the homeowner. Greenpeace did a study on that, and they said, is the person wanting to keep that big lawn, which is one of the most unnatural things that you can come up with, a lawn, especially in South Florida where grass just doesn't really grow. You know, you don't see any pastures of green grass or meadows like that in South Florida. So it is all a chemical pit, anybody's front yard. But the homeowners association enforces it. Oh, you can't have so many but this kind of tree and whatever. It's like homeowners association regulations and guidelines for your yard and landscaping are just like an attack against nature. It's an impossibility to do without lots of pesticides, herbicides, nitrates. You know, it just doesn't happen. So it's an artificial environment supported artificially when you see a pretty lawn in South Florida, you know. And they even have a company called ChemLawn. Go figure, you know. And of course, the guys spraying your lawn, you know, wearing a full suit, you know, protective suit in the summertime with a mask on, and telling you, oh no, it's safe for your kids to come out here and play. It's like, yeah. And so all this stuff, it rains, and it rains heavy in Florida, you know. So it rains, and then it goes down the street, down into the canals, and into the waterway systems, and out back into the reef and north. Remember, the current on the east side of the United States runs north. So Florida at the bottom of the state starts the pollution chain. It goes all the way up the east side of the United States, Canada, and on to the south side of, you know, Iceland, Greenland, and over into the British Isles before it hits Europe and works its way south. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So of course, I used to think about when I was swimming in the Chesapeake Bay, or I was a diver. You know, I got all these. I got the pollution from Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and some of Virginia. I'm swimming in all this trash. So I'm like, and I worked with Greenpeace when I was in Florida, but I saw how politically guided they are, you know, as big organizations are. And when I was in the boat industry, you know, I was rebuilding this one boat. I wanted to do diving, reef cleanup, and so on. And back in the early 90s, and I had a 32-foot sport craft motorboat that I was working with, and each engine was 235 horsepower, two 235s on the back. This thing was fast, but it blew its exhaust into the water. And I was looking at this, and I was like, how can I make this better? And basically, I'm not a mechanic, so when I talk to other mechanics, they're like, forget it, dude, it's not going to happen. And each one of these engines burned 30 gallons an hour. I'm like, whoa, this is getting expensive. So I sold that boat quick. But people wanted to ride in that boat and do reef cleanup. People wanted, because I set it up, I rebuilt this thing just for diving. People loved it. Didn't want to donate to gas, and gas wasn't that bad back then, 35 years ago. But they liked going someplace fast. They liked the luxury of it. They liked, even if it smelt, the fumes and so on. But that was a short-lived project. And I said, okay, I'll do smaller engine boats or sail and couldn't get anybody to come out there to do that stuff because it was an all-day adventure. We could spend all day out on the motorboat, but they didn't want to do all day out on the sailboat if they had to row or work the sails or do anything like that. I'm like, where's your enthusiasm about the government or the environment now? Government's doing all this pollution, and we're going to do our part, but not unless you got a luxury boat, And it's just like, wow. So it was a summer of like a lot of wake-up calls, But at the same time, when my kids were growing up, I couldn't take them I lived in Fort Lauderdale, wouldn't take them there. We'd go to Hollywood Beach. When their grandparents took them to Fort Lauderdale, they were like, oh, didn't want to go in because there's just like this sludgy color to it. And that was also when they had an alert to not swim, a boil of water alert for your water coming out of your tap, and a do not swim alert because of the sewage process plant was just having to dump stuff in there, because of some malfunction at the plant. And then of course my kids got sick, and that made it even stronger for me. I'm like, we got to do something. And I would go lecture and do different talks or just kind of interject things in my workshops about the environment, how important it is. But people were just like, oh yeah, we've heard it all before. Okay, fine. But the truth of it is, people, everything that happens on land eventually ends up in the sea. And so I'm building this other boat. It's a 32-foot open sailboat. Now, I could have built it for luxury sailing for myself, but it's kind of like, well, there's enough people doing that. I still want to get the awareness out there. And by the way, it's a kind of a nice thing. I'm happy about it. People have been telling me just the fact that I'm still building it, and I've been so disciplined at it, and I've been pushing so hard, that alone has been helping people in their lives. Now, here's where it was kind of an awakening this week about environment. The human environment, all right, when we think humans and environment, we separate them about what we are doing to the environment, and that's a valid thing to be thinking about. But it's also the human environment, because what happens in here, okay, dictates what happens out there. And so if you just don't care about yourself in here, you're not caring about anything. And when people can do a project that really rewards themselves, the human environment internally starts to get a lot better, and then that starts to radiate outwards. So I didn't think I'd be making much of an impact until I actually got in the water. So this was kind of a nice surprise this week when people were writing me and saying, yeah, I've been watching your project, and I built this boat with my kid. I did these things. And it's just, wow. So I just kind of a side note, but it was just a really nice surprise. But it also had me refocus and put more attention onto the human element, working the human element in my environmental work and environmental shamanism. And I'll probably do other videos on that later. So that's kind of a story of how I really got into my passion, / obsession with environmental issues. Oh, and I did work with Dolphin Research Center about 30 some years ago. Manny Rodriguez was running that back then. And that is a great organization. I love what I was doing was helping them fix boats. People would donate boats with big holes in them or something, and I'm like, I can fix that, and they would let me hang out in one of their bungalows or rooms or whatever, and it'd be a nice weekend kind of for me, a working weekend. I brought down my materials, they'd feed me, give me a place to stay, and I could swim with the dolphins and so on, and I'd fix these donated boats. I don't know if they still get those kind of donations anymore, but if you happen to be in the Keys, check them out. They're great people, great organization, and you know they've been there for a long time. I mean, that shows you they're doing something right. Swimming with the dolphins, it's just these beings. I won't say animals. These beings are just amazing. Um, they know when women are pregnant before the women know they're pregnant. There's another long story behind that. Um, but it's just an amazing experience. It's well worth the trip and the time and the money to go down there and be part of that group and donate to them. They're online. Um, Speaking of donations, you can donate to me. I have a GoFundMe at Shaman Hawk. Helped me make my environmental boat. I went back and forth with these people, but I think we got it worked out now. A lot of these platforms are getting hacked and stuff, but whatever. Let's see how it works. You can always PayPal always seems to be a best. People do me regular donations through PayPal at Shaman Hawk, and my Instagram, Shaman Hawk shows a lot of pictures of the boat. That's mainly all the pictures are in there. Yeah, I make political statements and dark humor too. So if you're not into that, just look at the pictures of my boat. It's been a great journey, and I'm almost in the water. I just have a little bit more things to do. So I really, really appreciate my patrons, my donors. I know everybody's having hard times, but and if you want to donate to a few different ones, Man Gear is on Instagram. He really doing a lot of stuff with the mangroves. Mangroves are really, really important in subtropical, tropical environments. But you can always find other people, and even people like, well, I want to donate $20, but who can I do it to? Well, give four of them $5. You can do that because you know people that have these environmental projects, like we eat very kind of like Spartan stuff, absolutely no luxuries, but we can buy like gluten-free yellow cornmeal, for $5 and things like that. That keeps us going on our projects or on the boats, or don't think that it doesn't matter. All right, so anything you give is always deeply appreciated because it adds up, like grains of sand on the beach, right? So our thing, and share the platform, share the videos and all that, because we are the ones that are really making a lot of bigger impact. Because like I said, when I was working with Greenpeace, they left South Florida for a while. All right, so like through most of the 90s, I think they would always spend a lot of time collecting donations, but then they just left. Like, well, we don't have environmental issues anymore, So yeah, so it's the little people on the grassroots level who really do big things in the environmental work. So donating to those local groups, you know, uh, just do whatever you can. Go out and do your part, picking up the trash and things like that, because it's not always just from littering. Sometimes storms, hurricanes can throw over some dumpsters, break out windows, blow things through people's homes, and it all ends up back in the waterways. And somebody needs to pick it up. So that's those nasty little humans that we go out and do those things. If you got any comments, leave them. I'll make other videos and responses and things like that. If you have other things that you want to talk about, you can email me at shamanhawk@gmail or shamaniclodge@gmail.com, and I'll write back to you. And that's about it. So till then, catch you guys later. Thank you.